Hi, I'm Megan Kuhn with Powerhouse Real Estate. Today we are going to talk through the contract of a real estate purchase. So when you go under contract to purchase a home, we use our Utah Real Estate official contract. And when we write that up, there are a few factors that you'll need to fill in and help us as your agent understand how you want those filled in. So today I'm going to go through each of those things that you'll need to know as you go into writing an offer and kind of some negotiation tactics to use with each of those things. The first thing we're going to talk about is earnest money. Earnest money is going to be like your deposit or down payment. This is going to be held with your real estate agent, so it doesn't go to the seller until closing. And actually it goes towards your down payment. It's not additional money for the purchase price or anything like that. It's all connected. So it's applied to your down payment or closing costs at the very end. However, that earnest money is kind of held as collateral. So if you were to get to the very end of the transaction and decide to cancel, it would go back to the seller. However, you have a lot of opportunities to receive that money back, like if your inspection fails or the appraisal fails. As long as you're before your deadlines, you're able to get that money back and it's just released back to you and you can use it on the next home. If we get all the way to closing, you don't receive that money back. It just gets applied towards your down payment. So let's say you were supposed to bring $5,000 for closing costs and you put $1,000 earnest money down, then it will ask you for $4,000 at closing because you already put the $1,000 down. So it's applied that way, and it's all held on the back end, so you don't have to worry about it once you've deposited it. The next thing we're going to talk about is purchase price. The purchase price is important because that's what you're willing to pay for the home. So one thing to keep in mind, you should pay less attention to the list price and more attention to the value of the home. Your realtor should work with you to understand what the home is worth. And so we're not paying attention to what the home is listed for. Of course, that will be considered, but we really want to understand what the home is worth and what you're willing to pay for it. List price can be all over the place because it comes down to what the seller and their agent believes that the home is worth. So when you're the buyer, it comes down to what you believe the home is worth and what you're willing to pay for it. And so we're going to run full numbers for you so you understand what the value of the home is. We can compare it to the list price and then decide on a purchase price together compared to what we believe the home is worth. The next thing we're going to talk about is inclusions and exclusions. These are the things that are in the home right now that you're planning to stay or leave with the property. So if you walk through the home and the fridge is there, we're going to negotiate if that fridge is included or excluded in the purchase price. Generally speaking, most of the kitchen appliances are always included. The range, the stove, the microwave if it's attached, if it's not just a countertop one, the dishwasher, those things are usually always included unless specifically stated that they're excluded. However, the fridge is one that is negotiable. So it will be listed in the purchase, in the listing to show if the seller is planning to leave it or if they're planning to take it. And so as the buyer, you do have the opportunity to ask for it though, even if the seller chooses to leave it off of the listing. So that's something that we will go through together per each listing that we're looking at. But it is something to consider. If it's not written in the contract, we can't really count on it. So we can't take somebody's word that they're going to leave something unless it's written in the contract. So that's something to remember. We really want to pay attention to making sure those details are written into the contract. All right, the next thing we're going to talk about is the home warranty. This is something that we almost always include for a buyer, and sellers should plan on this if you're selling your home. A home warranty is going to cover the property for a whole year for the buyer. This is going to cover things like furnace, air conditioner, things like that that can be really expensive to fix. If everything's working and in working condition when the property is purchased, then let's say in a month from the purchase something breaks, then the buyer just has to pay their service fee, which is usually about $60 to $70, and the warranty company will come out and fix anything that's broken or replace it for free. So we like to include this, number one, because as a buyer, you want to make sure that things are covered, and that will eliminate unexpected expenses for at least the first year for you. Number two, as a seller, this eliminates a lot of asks coming from the buyer. If we know that the furnace is older but it's in working condition, if we can get a home warranty, then we're less concerned about you paying to replace it before we move in, because we have that warranty to fall back on if something should break within that first year. So it's beneficial for both the buyer and the seller. Usually it's about $650, so that's written into the contract. It's usually chosen by the buyer's company, and then the seller pays for it at closing just out of their proceeds. Okay, the next thing we want to talk about are dates and possession. All of our deadlines are going to be written into the contract. So our deadlines are going to include number one, our inspection deadline. That is going to be how much time we need to inspect the home properly. This is going to be determined by what inspections you choose to do. A general inspection can be done usually within a week, depending on how far out an inspector is. But if you want to do extra inspections like roof inspections, HVAC inspections, things like that, radon, mold, all of those things take extra time. So we'll talk with you before we write the offer to make sure we have enough time to do all the things you'd like to do. Typically, we make this about a 2-week time frame. That gives us enough time to get everything done, but it also doesn't drag it out. The second deadline that we look at is going to be our appraisal and financing deadline. This one's usually about 3 to 4 weeks out from the time we write the contract. And this deadline is going to be determined by the time that our appraisal will be completed. The appraisal, remember, is the value of the home for the lender. And then also you'll get your soft clear to close. You should have your monthly payment figured out by now, as well as all the hard numbers, and then you should be locked in, your interest rate and all of those things locked in. So that's all going to be determined by this financing and appraisal deadline. And then the last deadline is closing. This one usually is just shortly after that financing deadline. We should be able to get it all closed up. This is when we sign the documents and the money's all transferred. Now, possession is one other thing that we have to determine, and this is going to be something we work together with the seller and the buyer on. Possession is typically in a normal contract, the buyer gets possession upon closing. So as soon as everything's funded and recorded, the buyer would get possession of the home, meaning they get the keys. However, in a lot of cases, the seller requests some extra time to move out. Maybe they're moving from one home to another and they have to close them simultaneously. They might want a week to get their things moved from one home to the other. And so giving them that buffer is going to be really helpful for the seller. So that's what we determine as possession. We'll just decide if it's the normal time frame of closing or if we want to extend that for the seller. And then the last thing that we talk about is just anything else you want added to the contract. If we're asking the seller to pay some of your closing costs, if there's anything extra that we want added that isn't in our normal contract. So if we're asking for specific things done by the seller, things like that, we'll add those in addendums and make sure it's all written in the contract. Because again, if it's not written in the contract, then we can't count on it. If it's not written in the contract, it doesn't exist. And so we want to make sure that everything is legally written in the contract, that it's signed off by the buyer and the seller, so that we can feel confident in the offer and moving forward. Now, once the buyer's written up the contract, we'll then submit the contract to the seller's agent. The seller's agent will then review it with the seller, and then they will sign it off as accepted, or they can also sign it off as a counteroffer. So they could send it back to us with some terms adjusted based on what they need, and then we just negotiate back and forth. We, as the buyer, could then choose to accept their counteroffer, or we could counteroffer again, or there's always the option to just decline it altogether and move on. And so those are things that, as you work with your agent, every scenario is a little bit different, and we'll work with you on your options and the process there. But that should give you a good idea of the things you need to know going into an offer and kind of how those things work throughout the contract. So if you have any questions about writing an offer, about things that go into an offer, feel free to reach out. I'm Megan Kuhn with Powerhouse Real Estate.